whispers of the Beast King's cruelty echoed across the kingdoms. To secure peace, a desperate lord offered his most wretched daughter as tribute. Veiled in heavy silk, condemned to marry a monster, she harbored a secret that would shatter the royal court and ignite an empire. Rain lashed against the heavy oak carriage, the rhythmic drumming a grim lullaby for the journey north. Inside the damp, freezing cabin sat Rosamond of House Valerius, shivering beneath a velvet cloak that was entirely too thin for the biting winds of the Blackwood Mountains. Her face, as it had been for the past 10 years, was obscured by a thick, ash-gray veil. In the human kingdom of Highcross, the name Rosamond was synonymous with tragedy and revulsion. A decade ago, a mysterious fire had ravaged the western wing of the Valerius estate. While Rosamond had survived, the realm was told that the flames had melted her features into a grotesque, terrifying ruin. Her stepmother, Lady Beatrice, had declared the girl unfit for public eyes, locking her away in the highest tower and forcing her to wear the heavy linen veil whenever she stepped beyond her chamber doors. But the tragedy of her face was a meticulously crafted lie. Beneath the coarse fabric, Rosamond possessed no scars. She was, in fact, devastatingly beautiful. A stark contrast to her favored younger half-sister, Cecily. Lady Beatrice, consumed by a venomous envy and terrified that Rosamond's blossoming features would eclipse Cecily's chances of a royal marriage, had fabricated the extent of the injuries. The veil was not a shield for the world. It was a prison for Rosamond. Over the years, Lord Arthur Valerius, a man of weak spine and immense greed, simply chose to ignore his eldest daughter's existence, letting the rumor of the ugly heir become undisputed truth. Now, that very lie had sealed her fate. The Ironclaw Pack, a brutal and ancient lineage of Lycans that ruled the northern territories, had recently crushed the Highcross armies in a bloody border dispute. To cement a fragile peace treaty, the Alpha King, Kaelin, demanded a bride of noble blood from House Valerius. He had expected Cecily, the famed Rose of Highcross, but Lord Arthur could not bear to send his golden child to the bed of a beast. Capitalizing on a vaguely worded clause in the treaty that simply demanded a daughter, Arthur had dragged Rosamond from her tower, packed her into a carriage, and sent his discarded, supposedly deformed daughter to be the sacrificial lamb. Outside the carriage, the thundering of hooves signaled the approach of her escort. Commander Gideon, Kaelin's second-in-command, rode a massive destrier alongside the window. Gideon was a towering mountain of muscle and scars, his eyes glowing with a faint, unnatural amber light in the gloom. "We approach the obsidian. Keep, my lady," Gideon called out over the howling wind, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. There was no mockery in his tone, only a rigid military formality, yet Rosamond could sense the pity radiating from him. The wolves had excellent senses. They could smell her terror. "Thank you, Commander," Rosamond replied, her voice soft but steady. She adjusted the heavy veil, ensuring not a single sliver of skin was visible. She had been warned by her father that if she removed the veil and revealed the deception too soon, King Kaelin might view it as an act of war, slaughtering her and marching on Highcross. She was to remain veiled until the wedding night. As the carriage crested the final ridge, the obsidian keep loomed into view. It was a fortress of black stone carved directly into the side of a jagged mountain, completely lacking the delicate marble columns and glass windows of her home. It was raw, brutal, and imposing. Torches lined the massive iron gates, casting dancing shadows over the hundreds of Lycan warriors who stood in silent, terrifying formation to receive their new queen. The carriage ground to a halt. The door was wrenched open by a guard, and Rosamond stepped out into the freezing mud. Standing at the top of the stone steps was Alpha King Kaelin. He was magnificent and terrifying. Taller and broader than any man in Highcross, Kaelin possessed an aura of absolute, suffocating authority. His dark hair was swept back from a face that was strikingly handsome yet incredibly harsh, marked by a single, jagged, pale scar that cut down his jawline. His eyes were the color of forged steel, cold and piercing. He wore a heavy mantle of black wolf fur over dark leather armor, looking less like a groom and more like a warlord preparing for a slaughter. Kaelin's steel gaze locked onto the huddled, veiled figure at the bottom of the steps. The rumors of the High Cross trickery had reached him days ago. He knew Lord Arthur had not sent the beautiful Cecily. He knew he was looking at the ugly heir, a woman supposedly so repulsive that children wept at her shadow. A muscle ticked in Kaelin's jaw. His wolf, the primal spirit residing within him, snarled in deep insult. They send us their refuse. They mock us. He descended the steps slowly, the crowd of werewolves parting for him like water. He stopped mere inches from Rosamund. She kept her head bowed, her hands trembling violently within her velvet muff. So, Kaelin's voice was dangerously quiet, yet it carried across the silent courtyard. Lord Arthur offers me the shadow instead of the sun. He believes a heavy veil can mask the insult of this treaty. Rosamund forced herself to speak, remembering the manners drilled into her. I am Rosamund of House Valerius, Your Majesty. I am here to honor the pact. Kaelin scoffed, the sound cold and dismissive. He did not reach out to touch her. He did not offer her welcome. You are here because your father is a coward, but the Ironclaw do not break their oaths. Even when humans twist theirs. He turned his back on her, his heavy fur mantle sweeping through the air. Take her to the bridal chambers. The ceremony begins at midnight, under the full moon, as is our way. As Kaelin walked away, Rosamund exhaled a shaky breath. She was trapped in a fortress of monsters, bound to a king who despised her before he even knew her true face. But as she followed the guards into the dark, cavernous halls of the keep, a quiet, defiant spark ignited in her chest. She had survived Lady Beatrice's cruelty. She would survive the Alpha King. The great hall of the Obsidian Keep was a theater of shadows and fire. Massive braziers burned with roaring flames, illuminating the ancient banners of the Ironclaw pack that hung from the vaulted ceilings. Thousands of Lycans had gathered to witness the union. Their murmurs filled the hall, a low, predatory hum that set Rosamund's teeth on edge. They were gossiping about her. She could hear the snide remarks, the cruel laughter about the monster bride hidden beneath the gray linen. Rosamund stood at the heavy wooden double doors at the far end of the hall. She was dressed in the traditional garments the Lycan maids had forced upon her, a gown of deep crimson velvet, heavily embroidered with silver threads depicting howling wolves and crescent moons. It was a beautiful gown, far richer than the rags she was accustomed to in her tower, but it felt heavy, like armor. And still, securely fastened to her crown, was the ash-gray veil. The drums began to beat a slow, primal rhythm that vibrated through the stone floor and into her bones. The doors swung open. Rosamund stepped forward. The hall instantly fell dead silent. Thousands of glowing eyes turned to fixate on her. The sheer weight of their collective gaze was enough to make her want to collapse, but she forced her spine to straighten. She would not cower. At the end of the long stone aisle stood the altar, a slab of rough-hewn obsidian, and waiting there was Kaelin. He had shed his armor for the ceremony. He wore a tunic of dark spun silk, unlaced at the throat, revealing the corded muscles of his chest. His posture was rigid, his expression a mask of stony indifference. As Rosamund approached, walking the endless aisle alone, Kaelin's steel eyes remained locked on the gray veil. He was fulfilling a duty, nothing more, a necessary sacrifice to ensure his borders remained secure. She finally reached the altar, stepping up to stand beside him. He towered over her, radiating a heat that was almost stifling. The pack elder, a grizzled Lycan with sightless white eyes and a staff of twisted bone, stepped forward. He spoke in the old tongue, a guttural, rolling language that Rosamund could not understand. The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming charged with an electric, ancient magic. The blood of the wolf and the blood of the earth must bind, the elder proclaimed, switching to the common tongue. He produced a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming menacingly in the firelight. Kaelin extended his right hand without hesitation. The elder sliced a shallow line across Kaelin's broad palm. Dark crimson blood welled to the surface. Then, the elder turned to Rosamund. Trembling, she pulled her hand from the folds of her crimson gown and offered it. The blade stung sharply as it dragged across her pale skin. "Join your lifeblood," the elder commanded. Kaelin turned to her. He reached out and grasped her bleeding hand, pressing his palm firmly against hers. The moment their skin touched and their blood mixed, a violent, invisible shockwave ripped through the great hall. Rosamond gasped, her eyes flying wide beneath the veil. A sudden, terrifying heat surged up her arm, blooming in her chest like a second heartbeat. It felt as though a tether of pure fire had suddenly snapped taut between them. But Kaelin's reaction was far more severe. The Alpha King staggered backward a half step, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. His pupils dilated, consuming the steel gray of his irises until his eyes were entirely black. A low, vibrating growl erupted from deep within his chest, echoing through the silent hall. His Lycan spirit, normally disciplined and locked away beneath a fortress of iron will, slammed violently against his mind, howling a single, deafening word. Mate. The entire hall erupted into chaos. The pack could feel the shift in the magical atmosphere. The mate bond, the rarest, most sacred phenomenon in werewolf kind, had just snapped into place. It was impossible. A true mate was a perfect equal, a soul perfectly mirrored. How could the majestic Alpha King be mated to a disfigured, weak human? Kaelin was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he stared down at the small, veiled woman whose hand was still locked in his. His mind was at war. His instincts were screaming at him to pull her into his arms, to claim her, to protect her against the entire room, but his logic, his deep-seated paranoia born of years of betrayal, fought back fiercely. She is a trick, his mind snarled. House Valerius is playing a deadly game. The bond is struck, the elder whispered, his voice trembling with unprecedented awe. But the union must be seen. Alpha, unveil your queen. The murmurs in the hall died instantly. The silence was absolute, suffocating. Every breath was held. Kaelin looked down at her. His hand, still slick with their mingled blood, released hers. He reached up toward the heavy ash-gray linen. Rosamond squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This is it, she thought. The moment he sees I am not the monster they promised. The moment he realizes my father lied. Kaelin's large, calloused fingers grasped the hem of the veil. With one swift, decisive motion, he pulled it up and off her head, casting the dark fabric onto the stone floor. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective, echoing gasp swept through the thousands of Lycans. Some stumbled back, others dropped to their knees in sheer shock. Kaelin froze, utterly paralyzed. Beneath the veil, there were no melted features. There were no hideous burns or twisted scars. Instead, Kaelin found himself staring into the most breathtakingly beautiful face he had ever seen. Rosamond's skin was flawless, resembling pale, luminous porcelain under the torchlight. Her lips were a soft, natural rose, slightly parted in terror, but it was her eyes that held him captive wide, striking pools of brilliant amethyst, framed by thick, dark lashes. As the veil fell, a cascade of hair, the color of spun gold, tumbled down her back, catching the firelight and glowing like a halo. She was not a monster. She was an absolute vision. Kaelin's black eyes slowly receded back to their steel gray, but the storm within them only intensified. The mate bond thrummed violently in his veins, singing with the proximity of her beauty. But alongside the pull of the bond came a dark, overwhelming fury. Lord Arthur had not sent his refuse. He had sent a masterpiece, hidden away in the dark. Why? Why hide a woman of such staggering beauty behind a rumor of deformity? To an Alpha King who had survived countless assassination attempts and political coups, beauty was merely a weapon. And a weapon hidden this carefully was meant for a devastating strike. What sorcery is this? A lord from the back of the hall shouted, breaking the silence. Witchcraft! Highcross has sent a changeling. The hall erupted into shouting, the Lycans baring their teeth, confused and agitated by the sudden turn of events. Kaelin did not look at his pack. He took a sudden, menacing step forward, crowding Rosamond's space. His large, bloodied hand shot out, but not to strike her. He cupped her jaw, his grip firm and unyielding, tilting her face up so she was forced to look directly into his terrifying, storm-filled eyes. "Who are you?" Kaelin demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating whisper meant only for her. "Who are you truly? And what poison have you brought into my home?" Rosamond's breath hitched. She looked into the eyes of her mate, realizing with a sinking dread that shedding the veil had not set her free. It had only thrust her into an even deadlier game. "I am exactly who they said I was," she whispered back, her amethyst eyes locking onto his without breaking contact. "I am the daughter they wanted to throw away. But I am no witch, my king. And I am no poison." Kaelin's thumb brushed against her lower lip, a startlingly gentle gesture that contradicted the fury radiating from him. The mate bond flared between them, hot and undeniable. "We shall see," Kaelin murmured darkly. He turned to the roaring crowd, his voice booming over the chaos, echoing with the absolute authority of the Alpha King. "Silence!" The hall instantly obeyed, the vicious snarls dying in their throats. "The blood vow is sealed. The mate bond has spoken," Kaelin declared, his voice ringing off the ancient stones. He looked back at Rosamund, his expression unreadable, a dangerous mix of possessive lust and profound suspicion. "The treaty holds, but the Queen's true trial begins tonight." Silence, thick and oppressive, draped over the Alpha's private chambers. The massive oak door slammed shut behind them, the metallic click of the iron lock echoing like a gunshot. Kaelin stood by the hearth, the roaring fire casting sharp, dancing shadows across the harsh planes of his face. He had dragged Rosamund away from the chaos of the great hall, his grip on her wrist bruising in its intensity, driven by a primal need to separate his new, utterly confounding mate from the prying eyes of his pack. Rosamund stood near the center of the sprawling room, her crimson velvet gown pooling around her. Without the heavy ash-gray veil, she felt terrifyingly exposed. The cold air of the northern fortress kissed her bare cheeks for the first time in a decade. "Speak," Kaelin commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. He did not look at her, keeping his gaze fixed on the flames. "Explain to me why the human king, Lord Arthur, would shroud his most beautiful daughter in coarse linen and peddle tales of a monster. Beauty in Highcross is currency. Why hide the gold?" Rosamund wrapped her arms around her waist, a defensive posture learned through years of isolation. "Because my stepmother, Lady Beatrice, demanded it," she answered, her voice trembling but clear. "When I was 7, a fire claimed the western wing. I escaped unscathed, but my survival threatened Beatrice's ambitions for her own daughter, Cecily. She convinced my father that the smoke had cursed me, that my face was a ruined, grotesque mockery of humanity. I was locked in the tower. The veil became my prison sentence." Kaelin finally turned, his steel-gray eyes narrowing. His lichen senses were extraordinary. He could hear the steady, rhythmic thrum of her heartbeat. He could smell the distinct, sharp scent of old sorrow and absolute truth radiating from her skin. She was not lying. "Your father allowed this?" Kaelin took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The mate bond flared between them, a magnetic pull that demanded he bridge the distance, but his paranoia kept him anchored. He allowed his flesh and blood to be buried alive in a tower to appease a jealous wife? "My father is a man who values his comfort above all else, Your Majesty," Rosamund replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Ignoring my existence was simply easier than confronting Beatrice's wrath." A vicious snarl ripped through Kaelin's chest. The wolf within him clawed at his ribs, violently outraged on behalf of its mate. The instinct to protect her was overwhelming, warring fiercely with the deeply ingrained suspicion that kept his pack alive. "And yet, they sent you here," Kaelin murmured, stopping mere inches from her. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the soft curve of her cheek. Rosamund gasped at the contact, a jolt of electricity racing down her spine. "They sent an unblemished jewel into a den of wolves, expecting us to rip you apart because we believed you were a deformed insult." "They sent me to die," Rosamund whispered, a single tear escaping her amethyst eyes. "Beatrice knew you would execute me the moment I removed the veil, interpreting it as a treacherous insult to the treaty. She wanted you to end the problem she created." Kaelin's thumb caught the tear before it could fall, his touch surprisingly tender for a man built for slaughter. "Then Lady Beatrice has grossly miscalculated," he stated, his voice dropping to a gravelly, possessive vow. "The Ironclaw do not destroy what is ours. And you, Rosamund of Highcross, belong to the pack now. You belong to me, But the political web woven by Highcross was far more treacherous than a simple deceit. Deep within the Obsidian Keep, in the guest quarters reserved for the human emissaries who had accompanied the bride, Viscount Frederick Harrington was sharpening a slender, silver-coated stiletto. Frederick was a well-known aristocrat in the southern courts, ostensibly sent by Lord Arthur to ensure the safe delivery of the bride. In reality, he was Lady Beatrice's private executioner. Beatrice had not left Rosamond's demise to chance. If the Alpha King did not execute the girl in a fit of rage over the veil, Frederick was ordered to finish the job. Furthermore, he was to assassinate the Alpha King himself, using a poison derived from wolfsbane and refined nightshade. The goal was to frame the Lycan Pack for a treacherous double murder, igniting a holy war that would allow Highcross to call upon the vast armies of the neighboring human empires to eradicate the wolves once and for all. The twisted drama of Rosamond's unveiling had thrown a complication into Frederick's plans, but the mission remained. Tonight, during the celebratory feast, the Viscount would strike, the human lords would have their war, and the ugly heir would finally be erased from history. The celebratory feast was a tense, brooding affair. The great hall had been transformed with long, heavy oak tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, dark ales, and winter root vegetables. The Lycans ate with predatory grace, their glowing eyes darting continuously toward the high table where their Alpha King sat beside his shocking, breathtakingly beautiful human mate. Rosamond sat rigidly beside Kaelin. She wore a delicate silver diadem, marking her as the newly crowned queen of the Ironclaw, but she felt entirely like an imposter. Despite the undeniable, electric connection thrumming between her and Kaelin, the sheer danger of her new reality was suffocating. Below them, seated with the few human guards allowed inside the keep, was Viscount Frederick Harrington. Rosamond's eyes locked onto the Viscount. She remembered him from her childhood, a frequent and whispering guest in Lady Beatrice's private parlors. A sudden, icy dread washed over her. She knew Frederick's true allegiance. He was not here to honor a peace treaty. As the feast progressed, the traditional passing of the ceremonial chalice began. It was a massive goblet of wrought iron and ruby, filled with spiced northern wine. It was to be passed from the most honored guest to the king, a symbol of shared trust. Viscount Frederick stood, his velvet doublet cutting a sharp contrast against the rough furs of the Lycans. He held the chalice high, a sickeningly smooth smile plastered across his aristocratic face. "To the Alpha King," Frederick called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall, "and to his surprising new queen. May this union bring the peace House Valerius so deeply desires." He stepped forward, ascending the stone steps to the high table, and offered the chalice to Kaelin. Rosamond's sharp eyes caught a minute, almost imperceptible smudge of dark purple powder on the rim of the goblet, right where Kaelin's lips would touch. In a flash of terrifying clarity, she recognized the scent drifting from the wine, a sickly, sweet, metallic odor masked by cloves. It was wolfsbane, a lethal, highly concentrated dose meant to paralyze a Lycan's heart within seconds. Kaelin reached out to take the chalice, his expression a mask of bored indifference. He did not trust the human, but custom dictated he drink. "No!" The word ripped from Rosamond's throat before she could stop herself. Driven by a sudden, desperate terror fueled by the mate bond, she lunged sideways. She slapped the heavy iron chalice out of Frederick's hand. The goblet hit the stone floor with a deafening crash. The dark red wine spilled across the dais, hissing and bubbling violently as the concentrated wolfsbane reacted with the ancient, spell-woven stones of the keep. The hall erupted. Viscount Frederick, realizing his assassination attempt was foiled, drew his concealed silver stiletto with lightning speed and lunged directly at Rosamond, intending to silence Beatrice's problem forever. He never even made it a single step. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the Obsidian Keep, Kaelin moved. He was a blur of lethal, unbridled violence. He intercepted Frederick mid-lunge, his massive hand closing around the Viscount's throat and hoisting the grown man entirely off the floor. The silver stiletto clattered uselessly against the stones. "You dare bring poison into my home?" Kaelin's voice was no longer human. It was the demonic, overlapping growl of the beast. His eyes were entirely black, his fangs fully descended. "You dare bear steel against my mate?" Frederick choked, his face turning a vibrant shade of purple as his legs kicked desperately in the air. Highcross will burn. The Viscount managed to wheeze out, blood trickling from his lips. The armies will come. Let them come, Kaelin snarled, his grip tightening until a sickening crack echoed through the sudden silence of the great hall. He tossed the lifeless body of the Viscount down the stone steps like discarded refuse. Kaelin turned slowly back to Rosamond. His chest heaved, the beast roaring just beneath his skin, demanding a slaughter. But as his black eyes locked onto her terrified, trembling form, the monster receded. She had saved his life. The human woman, battered by her own kind and thrown to the wolves, had risked everything to protect him. The last wall of Kaelin's suspicion crumbled into dust. The mate bond snapped fully into place, an unbreakable, blinding chain of loyalty and absolute devotion. He dropped to his knees before her, ignoring the thousands of his kin watching in stunned silence. He took her shaking hands in his massive, bloodied ones, pressing his forehead against her palms. "You are my queen," Kaelin swore, his voice raw with emotion, a solemn vow witnessed by the ancient stones. "My life is yours. My pack is yours." He lifted his head, his steel-gray eyes burning with a terrifying, righteous fury. "And tomorrow, we march on Highcross, not to honor a broken treaty, but to burn Lady Beatrice's tower to the ground and exact vengeance for the stolen years of my mate." Rosamond looked down at the fierce, brutal king kneeling at her feet. She had been sent to the darkness to die, but instead, she had found her sword. The veil was gone, and the era of the Ironclaw Queen had just begun. Thus, the wretched tribute became the most revered monarch in Lycan history. Rosamond of Highcross, once hidden beneath a shroud of lies, ruled the Obsidian Keep alongside her fiercely devoted beast. The Alpha King did not just lift her veil, he elevated her beyond the cruelty of her past. Together, they forged an empire where beauty and brutality reigned as one, an unbreakable, legendary union of soul and shadow.